capitalism, all of the gains in automation, it goes to the owner class. All you have to do is have everyone be an owner, and now suddenly any gain in automation is a gain for everybody. If you grow just one thing, it may not grow as well as if it grows with another thing. A good example of that is called the Three Sisters method of farming.
There is definitely multi-apartment buildings or multi-families that do passive design.
$100 million that they gave to Joe Rogan that they would kind of be out if they breach contract. Is that a bigger number? Or is 2 billion a bigger number?
I don't know, Zach.
It's a tough one, I know.
It's really hard.
And maybe comparing numbers is not Jeremy's strong suit. Gotta go kill a Jenny.
I still don't think you should kill her. I don't think it's a good idea.
It's a ghost, dude. Welcome back, everybody, to Bread Theory. Tonight, I'm joined by the lovely Amanda.
I just realized we are wearing the same outfits as that last part of your intro.
Like, I'm wearing the same t-shirt and you're wearing the same shirt?
Up top.
Cool.
It's just a reflection.
How are you doing tonight, Amanda?
I'm super. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, are you psyched to get into some really depressing history?
I mean, every day. When I'm not making depressing history, I want to learn about it.
Oh, okay. I guess that's a good way to look at it. So, we are back with Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States. We are in the part of the Trail of Broken Treaties, basically. Just the terrible relationship that the U.S. has had with Native American tribes since its inception, since the Revolution, and really before, but I mean before that point. It was not the U.S.
We just don't like people that are different.
English territories. Yeah, that's for sure.
That's what we've like.
As a nation, colonials did not like people that were the slightest bit different than them. They were very easily triggered by differences, as reactionaries and conservatives are today. You know, oh my God, someone wants to identify as a different gender. Oh, it's the end of Western civilization. It's all that was holding it together was people had genders and they knew them and stuff, and it's so bad. Ah, sky's falling. So basically the same as back then. Why are you giving me the stink eye?
I mean, it is silly, right? Like,
absolutely.
Also, like, how hard is it to, like, use someone's correct pronouns? Or...
Apparently so hard that some people would literally rather die or not and just delete the tweet and get back on Twitter. But whatever. You get the point. I made the point, woke moralist. Up yours. What are you laughing at, sunshine? I knew that one would get you.
I almost said, I wish you would. I'd rather die than correctly gender somebody. Like, how petty, though, really, truly.
Absolutely petty. Yeah.
I don't know. I was raised differently. Like, if somebody's different than you and you're curious about it, talk to them.
Right.
Ask them about it.
You know, Jordan Peterson's figured out the formula that if he wants to keep that gravy train a-flowing, he's got to just keep ratcheting up the reactionary talking points little by little until he's, you know, Steve Bannon levels of batshit conspiracy.
And then he's going to end up in jail.
Well, I mean, Steve Bannon's still not in jail, so...
He's heading there.
One can always hope, but... it's never a guarantee, not with this legal system.
When you're a middle-aged white man with a lot of money, prison isn't nothing to you.
Yup.
It's a slap on the wrist and a stop it. That's all they're gonna do. I was trying to make it into a song.
It's a very lovely song. I think we'll make that the intro. Anyway, let's get back into the chapter.
Let's get into it.
Oh, we don't need any puckering sounds.
That was a weak one.
There you go. That's a classic pucker. Classic crew.
Think Sphinx cat on a glass table.
Gross. That's so gross. you're interested in exploring this chapter on your own time, or if you missed something, you want to go back and listen to it again, here is the link for the video. Here we go. Man, Stream Elements is going crazy today.
Crazy.
So there you have it.
I'm crazy for feeling.
So, we're supposed to be doing our, I guess this is now the 4th monthly Leftist Karaoke night this Friday night, 9 p.m. But I haven't even made the event for it yet. So I think I'm going to do that tonight, and I'll just kind of see if there's a lot of interest in it, we'll keep it going. Otherwise, we may just skip it for a month or two because, again, you know, we are moving. We bought a house. It's a lot of stuff to do.
Upper class better watch out now. Boom.
Oh, God. We are not those kind of people. Why are you saying that?
Just kidding.
Ew. Anyway, we are freeing ourselves from the grips of the old vestiges of feudalism, the landlord class, and putting ourselves firmly in the grips of the capitalist class by paying into a mortgage. But at least with a mortgage, supposedly we'll have something to show for it at the end of our stay in that house.
Yes.
Oh my God, don't whisper. It's weird.
ASMR.
Oh my God. This is not what this channel's about. I'm gonna claw my eardrums out if you start talking like that. Yeah, I gotta consider that for a second.
I don't want you to claw your eardrums out.
Anyway, so if you're on Facebook, look for the event coming up. If you're interested in singing, let me know. Because that will definitely be a good gauge of interest. Oh, here we go with the yawns.
I think you should decide, like, if you have X number of people sign up, that yes, you will do it.
Yeah. But, every time a lot of people say, hey, I'll come, but then, one thing or another comes up. So, we'll see.
I think.
I guess it'll come down to the night. If I get a lot of people ready to go, ready to sing, then we'll do it. And
It's a healthy thing to create boundaries and set, like, if I have 10 people sign up, and if 6 of those 10 people show up, then it will happen.
I was thinking more like if just a couple people show up, that's enough to have a good rotation. Especially if someone here is singing too. Oh my God. Just put on another costume. That'll give you the strength.
That was not a costume. That was really him.
Oh, it was really him.
Yeah.
You just happened to be out of the room for that.
He's put
Time
on
exactly.
a few pounds.
Okay. Anyway.
If any of you are wondering
Let's get into
about this book.
the chapter. So,
It's a People's History of the United States by Howard
about the
Zinn.
history of broken treaties in the U.S. And away we go. Let's make sure we're on the proper playback speed. Yes, we are.
Do we have closed captioning on for those?
Yeah,
that
what do you call this?
need it? Oh,
What's this?
what's this moron?
I didn't say moron.
I just thought it.
I didn't think it either. Here we go.
The Indian was peculiarly susceptible to every sensory attribute of every natural feature of his surroundings.
That's
He
very
lived
loud.
in the open. He knew every
Thanks.
marsh, glade, hilltop, rock, spring, creek, as only the hunter can know them. He had never fully grasped the principle establishing private ownership of land as any more rational than private ownership of air. But he loved the land with a deeper emotion than could any proprietor. He felt himself as much a part of it as the rocks and trees, the animals and birds. His homeland was a holy ground, sanctified for him as the resting place of the bones of his ancestors and the natural shrine of his religion. He conceived its waterfalls and ridges, its clouds and mists, its glens and meadows to be inhabited by the myriad of spirits with whom he held daily communion. It was from this rain-washed land of forests, streams, and lakes, to which he was held by the traditions of his forebears and his own spiritual aspirations, that he was to be driven to the arid, treeless plains of the far west.
And see, again, we mentioned this last time when we were covering this chapter. But to me, this is kind of veering into some noble savage trope sort of territory. I don't think it does native people existent or in the past any good to either put them up on this mystical pedestal of the noble savage who is at one with all nature around them, completely benevolent and yet childlike in their innocence and misunderstanding of, more complex worlds and stuff like that. That's not exactly a good trope. Neither is they're all just savages without the noble part and bloodthirsty and so forth. Because clearly the Europeans had them beat on that front every single time. But anyway, tropes are not usually good. They were people, like any sort of people. They had their share of assholes, their share of geniuses, their share of you know any sort of person that you can name. This I think is a better way to look at any culture because it humanizes them for one thing, and they are human. And I'm sure that no matter what culture you find yourself coming into contact with for the first time, that is exactly what you find as you go on. There are assholes, there are good people, there are smart people, there are not as smart people, there are the wide range of human possibilities. The things that are different are reigning cultural hegemony. What sort of tropes animate them? For the Europeans, it was manifest destiny, the belief that they were ordained by God to conquer the entire earth, basically. That because they were advanced civilizationally, that they were therefore also advanced culturally, and therefore the rightful heirs to any land they strode upon. And for the natives, it would be many different things because they're not at all a monolith. They weren't then, they aren't now. So, it sounded like you had something you wanted to say.
Oh, I was just thinking about that particular culture of people, and I mean, I think there is a very strong natural tie and intuitive. I think of it more of like intuitiveness with nature, intuitive with the environment.
But I think any of that didn't come from some innate quality that they were somehow, these mystical holy beings that were far and away above the European settlers. I think if that was the case at all, it would just be from living very close to the land, like physically, like having to move with the seasons in some cases,
Right.
having to be in tune with various signs of nature that maybe the crops are going to be ready, or that a certain type of animal will be breeding and you're able to harvest it, or so, these sorts of things.
But I feel also like there's like, so like if they use a cow, right? If they kill a cow, they use all the parts of the cow, not just the meat. They use the hide, they use all the parts. They express gratitude
True.
to the animal for giving its life in hope that this cycle will continue, right?
Right.
Whatever, I'm just going on a side tangent. I guess
No,
it's
not
not
at all.
really relevant because
It's
it's
definitely relevant. Why are you saying that?
all right. Well, I'm just thinking
I'm
about
not
how.
poo-pooing you.
Well, then let me finish. Get my thought out.
I'm just saying, right, go ahead. I wasn't cutting you off. Go ahead.
So, like, compared to capitalism, where it's just take, exchange, 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 there's no gratitude in that cycle. It's just expected to be there.
Nature is all just resources.
Right.
To be plundered by the person who pays the most or is the most adventurous and first to try and exploit it the hardest.
Right. There's no respect.
Right.
There's no awareness of like, oh, we only have this much, so we should leave that be and let's go for something else instead, or let's
Sure.
wait another year or two until, I don't know.
Though I think you would find that, I mean, the various people that made up the English before they were English, when they were themselves, tribes people, hunters, gatherers, and the like, you would have found the same sort of things among them, same sort of traditions, giving thanks to the sea, when you have a good harvest of fish, the various gods that they talk to and follow being gods of various natural forces rather than some, omnipresent single deity. So I think it's more has to do with circumstances. Yeah. Yep. We're talking about gratitude, sure. I love gratitude as well. So anyway, I don't think it's anything innate to one culture or another. I think it just has more to do with circumstances a culture finds itself in, and whatever sort of stories it tells itself that are dominant. So it's both the natural side of just these are the physical limitations and possibilities that are around nearby, as well as nurture, just the ideas that some one way or another make it to the top and hold sway over people's minds. Okay.
All right.
Shall we move on?
Sure.
Okay.
A desolate region, then universally known as the Great American Desert. According to Van Every, just before Jackson became president in the 1820s, after the tumult of the War of 1812 and the Creek War, the Southern Indians and the whites had settled down, often very close to one another, and were living in peace in a natural environment which seemed to have enough for all of them. They began to see common problems. Friendships developed. White men were allowed to visit the Indian communities, and Indians often were guests in white homes. Frontier figures like Davy Crockett and Sam Houston came out of this setting, and both, unlike Jackson, became lifelong friends of the Indian. The forces that led to removal did not come, Van Every insists, from the poor white frontiersmen who were neighbors of the Indians. They came from industrialization and commerce. The growth of populations, of railroads and cities, the rise in value of land, and the greed of businessmen.
So again, this speaks to what I was saying, that it's not something innate about these settlers that makes them cruel and believe that they're better than everyone else and deserving of everything necessarily. It is the culture and the resources of those in power, of the settler colonialists, who push these things forward.
Here, child, let's it crying.
I think they just got out of the car. I think they're okay.
All right.
Party managers and land speculators manipulated the growing excitement. Press and pulpit whipped up the frenzy. Out of that frenzy, the Indians were to end up dead or exiled, the land speculators richer, the politicians more powerful. As for the poor white frontiersman, he played the part of a pawn, pushed into the first violent encounters, but soon dispensable. There had been 3 voluntary Cherokee migrations westward into the beautiful wooded country of Arkansas, but there the Indians found themselves almost immediately surrounded and penetrated by white settlers, hunters, trappers. These West Cherokees now had to move farther west, this time to arid land too barren for white settlers. The federal government, signing a treaty with them in 1828, announced the new territory as, quote, a permanent home, which shall, under the most solemn guarantee of the United States, be and remain theirs forever. It was still another lie.
Of course, we've seen how long those sorts of promises last. It's at best until the next person in power takes over and says, "Oh yeah, that was my predecessor. I don't play like that." So
Right. It's cheap.
yeah.
But I mean, come on, we don't even make promises to our own people. Let's look at Roe v. Wade.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a lot of promises around that, but
Yeah, there's a lot
it's
of
not the right actions ever.
promises around it now. Like, if I get one more message asking me to donate, help support the cause, like, no, I absolutely will give you $0. You didn't protect it before. You had 50 years to do it. You did nothing. So
Yep.
guess what you get?
Nothing.
Nothing.
You get nothing, sir. 0.
You get nothing. Absolutely nothing. You've lost. Charlie Bucket, you blew it.
Great movie.
And the plight of the Western Cherokees became known to the 3/4 of the Cherokees who were still in the East, being pressured by the white man to move on. With 17,000 Cherokees surrounded by 900,000 whites in Georgia, Alabama, and Tennessee, the Cherokees decided that survival required adaptation to the white man's world. They became farmers, blacksmiths, carpenters, masons, owners of property. A census of 1826 showed 22,000 cattle, 7,600 horses, 46,000 swine, 726 looms, 2,488 spinning wheels, 172 wagons, 2,943 plows, 10 sawmills, 31 grist mills, 62 blacksmith shops, 8 cotton machines, 18 schools. The Cherokees' language, heavily poetic, metaphorical, beautifully expressive, supplemented by dance, drama, and ritual, had always been a language of voice and gesture. Now their chief, Sequoyah, invented a written language which thousands learned. The Cherokees' newly established legislative council voted money for a printing press, which on February 21st, 1828, began publishing a newspaper.
That's interesting. You know, I hadn't really thought of that before, but he was talking about how their language was very poetic and he used a lot of gestures and stuff like that, and how that doesn't really translate when you move to the written word, like at all. You would have to have pictures along with it, showing gestures and that sort of thing.
I think it's interesting that they came up with the language, but most people were taught it, as were we, only reserve that right for certain persons to have access to knowledge.
Yeah, that is another way that writing can be used. I mean, that was a big part of certain Christian denominations, where not only were the priests virtually the only ones who were literate, but only their interpretation counted. So they kind of kept that knowledge separate, which, you know, just so happens to create a dependency on that certain special class of people to guide your entire life.
So I think that's really manipulative.
I kind of feel that way too, yeah.
Like, you should have the right to make your own decisions and you should have the right to have access to informed decisions. But language is just so special and so critical for, like, everybody. I mean, I work in education and I think about all the different types that I'll use in a day. Like, I obviously speak, I write down, I have pictures that I'll show students instead of speaking. I sign a little bit. I'm not very good. Please don't ask for anything major. And then I use, like, my body language. I'm always super conscientious of what I'm doing with my physical person, as not to alarm students or throw things off.
Yeah,
Because, it says a lot.
definitely. That's pretty cool. I kind of wish we had a more expressive way of just talking with one another. I took one semester of American Sign Language in college, and it was great. Just to learn the sorts of things that you don't really even think about. Like, you can sign across very large spaces where you couldn't, shout, especially if it was like a busy crowd or something like that, where there was a lot of noise going on. You can still sign, and the person that you're talking to
As
gets
long as
what
they
you're
can
saying.
see you.
As long as they can see you.
Like,
Yeah, it's pretty cool. But then also, if you're talking with people perhaps that English is not their first language, if you're throwing in signs at the same time, it can help them pick up. Like, that's why they teach sign language to infants as they're developing language skills, because you can learn the signs faster than you can learn how to manipulate your mouth.
right. Well, it also just like communicates the need, like water, more. Thank you,
Poop.
please.
Oh, we don't do that one. Oh, okay. Okay.
Snow, turtle.
That's very cute, turtle.
It's a nice one. It's one of my favorite signs.
Yeah. Anyway, it's just cool to see it both work in tandem, and I feel that I think combining the two is a better way to express yourself and communicate ideas because you have more of it.
It's interesting too because it's like universal though because like in Germany, if somebody is speaking to you and they are not gesturing with their hands while they're speaking, they're either really formal, upset with you, or, not from Germany.
Ah,
Because it's very common to like da 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 and gesture while you're talking, but like
sausage, schnitzel, bratwurst. I'm in trouble now.
I studied German for 8 years, and all this man thinks it is chewing on rocks and bratwurst. That's what he's.
That's not what I think. I'm just joking.
Like you tried to teach him the words for like potato and strawberry, and he's like, ah, 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 ah. Like, thanks, really appreciate that. Whatever. Folks, if you want to learn German, you should, because guess what? Unlike English, they actually pronounce all the letters in the word.
All the letters in the 16-foot words. Moving on.
When they don't have a word for something, they make one. They combine.
Just smash together as any words they can pluck out of the air.
Yes, it's usually like size, color, object, or other adjectives. You know, it just.
It's a beautiful language.
Yeah, it's a beautiful language, and every word's longer than our entire English alphabet.
The Cherokee Phoenix, printed in both English and Sequoia's Cherokee. Before this, the Cherokees had, like Indian tribes in general, done without formal government. As Van Every puts it, quote, "The foundation principle of Indian government has always been the rejection of government. The freedom of the individual was regarded by practically all Indians north of Mexico as a canon infinitely more precious than the individual's duty to his community or nation. This anarchistic attitude ruled all behavior, beginning with the smallest social unit, the family. The Indian parent was constitutionally reluctant to discipline his children. Their every exhibition of self-will was accepted as a favorable indication of the development of maturing character." Unquote.
I like that statement there, Blatt. I, for one, am tired of silent letters mooching off the hard-working syllables of the American language. Oh, man. You should try French.
Oops.
Oh. I guess we're watching Reels now. Anyway, I liked your comment. That was very funny.
Was an occasional assembling of a council with a very loose and changing membership whose decisions were not enforced except by the influence of public opinion. A Moravian minister who lived among them described Indian society, quote, "Thus has been maintained for ages, without convulsions and without civil discords, this traditional government, of which the world, perhaps, does not offer another example. A government in which there are no positive laws, but only long-established habits and customs. No code of jurisprudence, but the experience of former times. No magistrates, but advisors, to whom the people nevertheless pay a willing and implicit obedience, in which age confers rank, wisdom gives power, and moral goodness secures title to universal respect." Now surrounded by white society, all this began to change. The Cherokees even started to emulate the slave society around them. They owned more than 1,000 slaves. They were beginning to resemble that civilization the white man spoke about, making what Van Every calls a stupendous effort to win the goodwill of Americans. They even welcomed missionaries and Christianity. None of this made them more desirable than the land they lived on. Jackson's 1829 message to Congress made his position clear. Quote, I informed the Indians inhabiting parts of Georgia and Alabama that their attempt to establish an independent government would not be countenanced by the executive of the United States and advised them to emigrate beyond the Mississippi or submit to the laws of those states. Congress moved quickly to pass a removal bill. There were defenders of the Indians. Perhaps the most eloquent was Senator Theodore Frelinghuysen of New Jersey, who told the Senate debating removal, quote, we have crowded the tribes upon a few miserable acres on our southern frontier. It is all that is left to them of their once boundless forest. And still, like the horse leech, our insatiated cupidity cries, give, give. Sir, do the obligations of justice change with the color of the skin? The North was, in general, against the...
Yeah, this narrator really likes to do the accents, and usually he really plays it up when he's doing an accent of some, high and mighty figure, someone of the nobility or the owner class. But yeah, sorry that it enrages you. Oh yes, and I confess I myself am guilty of sometimes doing the poor Southern accent when I'm trying to mock someone who I believe to be stupid, and it's not right, and I think it really really needs to stop, myself included. It's just one of those things that gets ingrained in you, and it's hard to get out of, but.
Yeah, your boss has the most lovely Southern accent.
Yeah, well, he has a very upper class accent,
Oh,
I would say.
I just
But
have
he's from Louisiana.
I just have the
Texas.
Minnesotan accent.
Was that like a Minnesotan Southern accent?
Yeah, it's Northfield.
Northfield? Oh, okay.
I kid. No, but Minnesotan accent, that's what I have. Sometimes a touch of Ohio comes in.
What is an Ohio accent like?
It is a touch of Southern, actually.
Yeah.
It's one of
I feel
those
like it's
weird
one of those states that's
that
kind
like
of divided.
sits. Yep.
Yeah.
Like if you ever meet Uncle Jesse and Aunt Rosemary,
Yeah.
that's like their speech pattern.
Interesting. I think regional dialects are cool. It's really interesting to see the different way that people use the English language, the different idioms that they come up with, and ways of just express themselves. So really, if anything, it should be celebrated, not mocked.
Though, interesting fact, when they are hiring newscasters, they prefer folks with a Midwestern accent
yes.
because it is the most easy to understand.
Supposedly.
They believe we speak clearer than others. I don't think that's true. I feel like when you... And I think this is true for everybody, but I could be wrong. When you're around certain people all the time, certain things, like... their speech pattern becomes clear to you. Mm-hmm. You know what they're saying. You know how they talk. You know things of that person. You get used to it.
Yeah.
Like I have a Portuguese coworker, and I understand her crystal clear. At first, I didn't, but it's taken me a bit of time spending around her, and it's like the accent. I don't want to say it goes away, but just like that initial thickness and difficulty that was there dissipates really quickly. You shouldn't be ashamed of your accent.
No, you shouldn't.
I wish I had one.
I mean, everyone has an accent.
Well, okay, I wish
It's
mine was a
impossible.
little more exciting. That's
right.
And
but
even
I mean,
I try to fake it.
even the one that that's good. You're not anymore. You should be proud of it. But even the accent that they land on is like the most understandable has changed over time in terms of American accents. Like remember. Come up and see me sometime. Oh, hey, big boy. It was called like the Mid-Atlantic accent, and I think it was supposed to be like a smash together of British basically and East Coast American
Really?
because they
Like
were
Boston? Like
not like Boston, but like
okay.
further, like more like Maryland, Connecticut, that sort of thing. Um, but I think the idea was supposed to be that they were going to sell movies to both American and UK audiences, so they wanted them to be equally understandable to both. And now it's kind of migrated out to the Midwest, which is not really even a Midwest accent. Like real Midwest accents, they kind of all sound a little bit Canadian, don't you know? And like you know, even the like the Chicago, it's got the long O's as well. You got to get up into the Upper Peninsula and you know all the Midwest accents.
Or the New York.
Well, New York is not Midwest at all.
Huh.
But there's even gradients of New York accent. You know, there's the the classic Brooklyn one that no one really, I don't think, even uses anymore. Um, but then there's like the Bernie Sanders sort of New York accent where it's a little more subtle. And
Isn't he from Vermont?
he's from Brooklyn. He moved to
Oh.
Vermont to become a politician.
Lovely individual.
Yeah, fine guy. Yeah, come up and see me sometime. Thanks, Adam.
All I can think of is Alaska's Mae West.
I don't remember what she did for that.
She's like, hey.
I can imagine it was not very good.
Oh
I
no,
don't
it was
think-
excellent.
Was it?
Yes.
I didn't think she was good at accents and stuff like that.
I can only do one accent.
Top Cat cartoon accents. I don't know what Top Cat is. Oh, thanks for the cheer, Allie. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Since you did cheer, I should let everyone know that Twitch has lowered their threshold to getting a payout to you have to accumulate $50. So I've actually been paid by Twitch now.
Whoop whoop.
I believe. Because I was coming up to the $100 mark, which was the old one. But thanks to you all cheering and subbing and just watching the ads and stuff like that. Over these almost 2 years now, I've managed to make a little money back. So thank you all very much for coming along on this journey. Top Cat New York accent. Top Cat New York. So I'm gonna have to Google this because I have no idea what that means. Top Cat New York. Like
Isn't that cartoon Top Cat?
I don't remember this. Top Cat. Let's see.
Oh yeah, I remember that. Officer Dibble.
Top Cat. I'm gonna have to look it up on YouTube. I need to hear this accent. I'll see how well I can do.
I like to do a Russian accent, and sometimes I try to do other accents, and it always
It always comes back
back to
to
Russian.
to Russian. It's so funny, and you actually do that. Well, I mean, I'm no real judge, but it seems to me like you do it pretty well. Let's see. Top Cat. Best moments. Officer Dibble! Oh my goodness! Is that kind of a Top Cat accent? I feel like I'm wavering a little bit too much.
well,
But
you're going a
I
little
never
lost
see. I haven't
in
seen.
there.
I haven't seen the whole thing, so that's as good as I'm gonna try. It's big in Mexico, Top Cat. Oh, that's funny.
Huh.
Top Cat is apparently big in Mexico. That's fun. I'll have to check into that more. I'll practice my Top Cat for next time for you, Allie.
Top Cat.
So Blatt, you say you sound like Scooter from Borderlands. I've accepted it, but I wouldn't have it be my first choice. Scooter from Borderlands. I noticed, man, you guys are throwing out all these cultural references I don't know.
Zach's not very up with the pop culture, folks.
No, I just started doing the Rings of Power on whatever.
Nerd.
I don't care. That's fine.
I just tease.
Whatever. Which one of us has a TARDIS? That's what I thought.
I don't have one.
You used to.
Yeah, I
What
used
happened
to.
to it?
It's called purging.
Oh, okay.
We're gonna procure crap.
Oh, Scooter from Borderland. That you know what that reminds me a lot of is what was his name? He was on King of the Hill. He was voiced by Tom Petty. Um, Lucky. He's lucky. I slipped on some pee-pee down at the Costco, and they gave me extra money for the rest of my life.
I slipped on.
Slipped on pee-pee down at the Costco. That's his claim to fame. That's how he got his pumped up truck.
And you don't have to live like a.
Gilligan's Island.
Oh,
boy.
every time. I'm sorry, I can't help it. Every time I hear Gilligan's Island got brought up, the Monday following Zach and I's very first date, I had jury duty, and my judge's last name was Gilligan, and I was dying to tell him the whole
You
time.
wanted to just burst out and be like,
"Oh,
do you use a coconut phone?"
Hello. I really wanted to text Zach, but I was like, we'd only been out one time, and I did not.
Let me see if I can do a kill. Oh, sorry. Go. Keep telling your story.
I did not think that we had established that kind of rapport yet, and I knew he would have appreciated it, so I had to wait till I saw him next to, like, drop that one, and then it turns out I was the only one that thought that was really funny. I ended up getting kicked out after questioning.
We're gonna have a search for the skipper right now. No, that was not very good. I don't know if I can do a Gilligan. I'll have to think about that.
You gotta listen to it a little more. You can't just listen to like
Nope, only 2 seconds. Too scared to be frightened. Oh yeah, he had. Yeah, I would have to work on that one. I don't know if I can do that. That's true. Gilligan was a hillbilly.
Oh, this.
What was he, the first mate or something? I don't even remember.
I love Skipper.
Being like into Tom Petty is a compliment. Yeah, I love the character of Lucky. He was a really interesting, complex dude. Anyway, maybe we could get a little more of the reading done tonight. What do you say, gang? What do you say, gang?
And Marianne, the millionaire,
The
and his
removal bill.
wife.
The South was
the
for it. It passed the
movie star,
House 102
the
to
professor.
97.
Don't give me
It passed the
copyright
Senate
strike.
Narrowly, it did not mention force, but provided for helping
I'm gonna
the
get kicked
Indians
out.
to move. What it implied was that if they did not, they were without protection, without funds, and at the mercy of the states. Now the pressures began on the tribes, one by one. The Choctaws did not want to leave, but 50 of their delegates were offered secret bribes of money and land, and the Treaty of Dancing Rabbit Creek was signed. Choctaw land east of the Mississippi was ceded to the United States in return for financial help in leaving, compensation for property left behind, food for the first year in their new homes, and a guarantee that they would never again be required to move. For 20,000 Choctaws
what
in
that's
Mississippi, though most of them hated the treaty, the pressure now became irresistible. Whites, including liquor dealers and swindlers, came swarming onto their lands. The state passed a law
Allergies
making
are
it a
bad.
crime
Could you, like,
for Choctaws
turn
to
away from
try
the
to
microphone?
persuade one another on the matter
It's very
of removal.
loud. When you
In late
sneezing.
1831,
Oh my God.
13,000 Choctaws began the long journey west to a land and climate totally different from what they knew. Quote, marshaled by guards, hustled by agents, harried by contractors, they were being herded on the way to an unknown and unwelcome destination like a flock of sick sheep, unquote. They went on ox wagons, on horses, on foot, then to be ferried across the Mississippi River. The army was supposed to organize their trek, but it turned over its job to private contractors who charged the government as much as possible, gave the Indians as little as possible. Everything was disorganized. Food disappeared. Hunger came. Van Every again, quote, "The long, somber columns of groaning ox wagons, driven herds, and straggling crowds on foot inched on westward, through swamps and forests, across rivers and over hills, in their crawling struggle from the lush lowlands of the Gulf to the arid plains of the West, in a kind of death spasm. One of the last vestiges of the original Indian world was being dismembered, and its collapsing remnants jammed bodily into an alien new world." The first winter migration was one of the coldest on record, and people began to die of pneumonia. In the summer, a major cholera epidemic hit Mississippi, and Choctaws died by the hundreds. The 7,000 Choctaws left behind now refused to go, choosing subjugation over death. Many of their descendants still live in Mississippi. As for the Cherokees, they faced a set of laws passed by Georgia. Their lands were taken, their government abolished, all meetings prohibited. Cherokees advising others not to migrate were to be imprisoned. Cherokees could not testify in court against any white. Cherokees could not dig for the gold recently discovered on their land. A delegation of them protesting to the federal government received this reply from Jackson's new Secretary of War, Eaton, quote, "If you will go to the setting sun, there you will be happy. There you can remain in peace and quietness so long as the waters run and the oaks grow. That country shall be guaranteed to you, and no white man shall be permitted to settle near you." The Cherokee Nation addressed a memorial to the nation, a public plea for justice. They reviewed their history. Quote, "After the peace of 1783, the Cherokees were an independent people. Absolutely so. As much as any people on earth, they had been allies to Great Britain. The United States never subjugated the Cherokees. On the contrary, our fathers remained in possession of their country and with arms in their hands. In 1791, the Treaty of Holston was made. The Cherokees acknowledged themselves to be under the protection of the United States and of no other sovereign. A cession of land was also made to the United States. On the other hand, the United States stipulated that white men should not hunt on these lands, not even enter the country without a passport, and gave a solemn guarantee of all Cherokee lands not ceded. They discussed removal, quote, "We are aware that some persons suppose it will be for our advantage to remove beyond the Mississippi. We think otherwise. Our people universally think otherwise. We wish to remain on the land of our fathers. We have a perfect and original right to remain without interruption or molestation. The treaties with us and laws of the United States made in pursuance of treaties guarantee our residence and our privileges and secure us against intruders. Our only request is that these treaties may be fulfilled and these laws executed." Now they went beyond history, beyond law. Quote, "We entreat those to whom the foregoing paragraphs are addressed to remember the great law of love. Do to others as ye would that others should do to you. We pray them to remember that, for the sake of principle, their forefathers were compelled to leave, therefore driven from the old world, and that the winds of persecution wafted them over the great waters and landed them on the shores of this new world, when the Indian was the sole lord and proprietor of these extensive domains. Let them remember in what way they were received by the savage of America, when power was in his hand, and his ferocity could not be restrained by any human arm. We urge them to bear in mind that those who would not ask of them a cup of cold water and a spot of earth are the descendants of these, whose origin as inhabitants of North America, history and tradition are alike insufficient to reveal. Let them bring to remembrance all these facts, and they cannot, and we are sure, they will not fail to remember and sympathize with us in these, our trials and sufferings." Unquote. Jackson's response to this in his second annual message to Congress in December 1830 was to point to the fact that the Choctaws and Chickasaws had already agreed to removal, and that a speedy removal of the rest would offer many advantages to everyone. For
Kind of funny how appealing to the empathy of your oppressor doesn't necessarily work. Appealing to their humanity, to them to see you as people who belong in a place that you've been for time immemorial doesn't necessarily have the effect that you desire. You know, Andrew Jackson, as I'm going to say many times, worst president the U.S. has ever had. Absolutely brutal to the native people, to black people, to everyone that was not white. Had somehow a soft spot for the working class white people, the factory laborers, the farmers, but
Probably not soft enough.
well, no, he seemed pretty, you know, endeared to them. I believe he didn't come from money or anything, so you know, at least he had empathy that for them, but it extended to absolutely nobody else, and probably not to women as well. I don't know of anything specific. What?
I just heard metal scratching.
Okay. We'll go look.
Yep.
Careful, you can knock the phone on the floor.
Someone is moving in.
Oh yeah.
I hope they didn't just hit a freaking car.
It didn't sound like it. It sounded like they were like pulling out a ramp or something. Anyway, I don't remember the famous quote, but there's a famous activist who said, you know, never depend on the humanity of your oppressors, and this is definitely a case where that's true. Move on a little bit.
whites, it, quote, will place a dense and civilized population in large tracts of country now occupied by a few savage hunters.
Yep.
For Indians, it will, quote, perhaps cause them gradually, under the protection of the government and through the influence of good counsels, to cast off their savage habits and become an interesting, civilized, and Christian community.
We couldn't possibly have meant that, because that's exactly what the Cherokee were trying to do, as was just stated. And his response was basically, no, you all need to move. You just need to move. So yeah, they couldn't fight back. They couldn't just assimilate. They were really between a rock and a hard place. And it's hard to figure out what they even could have done to oppose the march of westward expansion at that point. Related to Jackson, relatives displaced by him. Oh, wow. That's amazing. Yeah, I myself have history that goes back to, at least on my father's side, to before the Revolutionary War. My grandmother was offered admittance into the Daughters of the American Revolution, which means you have to have heritage that goes back at least that far. So there's a pretty good chance that's somewhere along my line, and I've never looked into this personally, but I wouldn't be surprised if somewhere along my line I have ancestors that owned slaves, that perhaps were politicians that did terrible things. I mean, who knows? So it's just something that we all got to kind of reconcile with at some point. And I think really the only thing we can do is make sure that the future is better than the past and the legacy that those sorts of ilk have left behind.
He reiterated a familiar thing, quote, toward the aborigines of the country, no one can indulge a more friendly feeling than myself.
Yeah.
However, quote, the waves of population and civilization are rolling to the westward, and we now propose to acquire the countries occupied by the red men of the South and West by a fair exchange.
Fair exchange. What exchange exactly?
Georgia passed a law making it a crime
don't
for a white
get
person to
killed?
stay in Indian territory without taking an oath to the state of Georgia. When the white missionaries in the Cherokee Territory declared their sympathies openly for the Cherokees to stay, Georgia militia entered the territory in the spring of 1831 and arrested 3 of the missionaries, including Samuel Worcester. They were released when they claimed protection as federal employees. Worcester was a federal postmaster. Immediately, the Jackson administration took away Worcester's job, and the militia moved in again that summer, arresting 10 missionaries as well as the white printer of the Cherokee Phoenix. They were beaten, chained, and forced to march.
Oh no, James, we're talking about a different horrible Jackson. We're talking about Andrew Jackson, worst president of the United States. That would be my nomination anyway. Yeah.
35 miles a day to the county jail. A jury tried them, found them guilty. 9 were released when they agreed to swear allegiance to Georgia's laws, but Samuel Worcester and Elizur Butler, who refused to grant legitimacy to the laws repressing the Cherokees, were sentenced to 4 years at hard labor. This was appealed to the Supreme Court in Worcester v. Georgia. John Marshall, for the majority, declared that the Georgia law on which Worcester was jailed violated the treaty with the Cherokees, which, by the Constitution, was binding on the states. He ordered Worcester freed. Georgia ignored him, and President Jackson refused to enforce the court order. Georgia now put Cherokee land on sale and moved militia in to crush any sign of Cherokee resistance. The Cherokees followed a policy of nonviolence. Though their property was being taken, their homes were being burned, their schools were closed, their women mistreated, and liquor was being sold in their churches to render them even more helpless. The same year Jackson was declaring states' rights for Georgia on the Cherokee question in 1832, he was attacking South Carolina's right to nullify a federal tariff. His easy re-election in 1832.
There's another old trope that just never quite flushes like the turd it is. States' rights, states' rights. It always comes up in service of a very specific aim, usually a very conservative one, and then just magically disappears when it's the opposition that wants states' rights. Like states' rights to have an abortion. They're trying to nullify that after they said, oh, but it's states' rights. The abortion ban should be allowed across the country on a state-by-state basis because of states' rights. But also they shouldn't have rights. It should just be no. So it's a pretty easy one to spot every time it rears its ugly head, but it never is about states' rights. It's only ever about
You should believe what I believe.
forcing power or resisting power, depending on who's wielding it and who wants to wield it.
No kidding.
Yeah, states' rights to do what? That's right. And so in this case, states' rights to either remove natives or not allow federal tariffs. So depending on which side of each of those are on, you're either just pro-states' rights through and through, or you're totally against it. But it's always a dumb argument. So don't use that argument either. That's just stupid. It's a dumb argument that never is what it says it is.
687,000 to 530,000 for his opponent, Henry Clay, suggested that his anti-Indian policies were in keeping with popular sentiment, at least among those white males who could vote, perhaps 2 million of the total population of 13 million. Jackson now moved to speed up Indian removal. Most of the Choctaws and some of the Cherokees were gone, but there were still 22,000 Creeks in Alabama, 18,000 Cherokees in Georgia, and 5,000 Seminoles in Florida. The Creeks had been fighting for their land ever since the years of Columbus against Spaniards, English, French, and Americans. But by 1832, they had been reduced to a small area in Alabama, while the population of Alabama, growing fast, was now over 300,000. On the basis of extravagant promises from the federal government, Creek delegates in Washington signed the Treaty of Washington, agreeing to removal beyond the Mississippi. They gave up 5 million acres with the provision that 2 million of these would go to individual Creeks, who could either sell or remain in Alabama with federal protection. Van Every writes of this treaty. The interminable history of diplomatic relations between Indians and white men had, before 1832, recorded no single instance of a treaty which had not been presently broken by the white parties to it. however solemnly embellished with such terms as permanent, forever, for all time, so long as the sun shall rise. But no agreement between white men and Indians had ever been so soon abrogated as the 1832 Treaty of Washington. Within days, the promises made in it on behalf of the United States had been broken. A white invasion of Creek lands began. Looters, land seekers, defrauders, whiskey sellers, thugs, driving thousands of Creeks from their homes into the swamps and forests. The federal government did nothing. Instead, it negotiated a new treaty providing for prompt emigration west, managed by the Creeks themselves, financed by the national government. An army colonel, dubious that this would work, wrote, quote, "They feel
This chair is painful. I don't want to sit.
Oh, I'm sorry. We need to get a better chair for you so you can
Yeah.
join more often.
I know.
Everyone say thank you to Amanda for joining us, though.
Bye, guys. Folks. This is my new all-encompassing. I keep getting distracted by all the noise.
Yeah,
The neighbors moving in.
we got neighbors moving in apparently, just as we're about to move out. So
Not too bad.
somehow they can still find people to move into this place, even though it looks like garbage on the outside. Anyway, let's move on.
Salvation on the route, and can it be otherwise? When many of them are nearly starving now, without the embarrassment of a long journey on their hands? You cannot have an idea of the deterioration which these Indians have undergone during the last 2 or 3 years, from a general state of comparative plenty to that of unqualified wretchedness and want. The free egress into the nation by the whites, encroachments upon their lands, even upon their cultivated fields, abuses of their person, hosts of traders who, like locusts, have devoured their substance and inundated their homes with whiskey, have destroyed what little disposition to cultivation the Indians may once have had. They are browbeat and cowed and imposed upon and depressed with the feeling that they have no adequate protection in the United States and no capacity of self-protection in themselves. Northern political sympathizers with the Indians seemed to be fading away, preoccupied with other issues.
Thanks,
Daniel
James.
Webster was making a rousing speech in the Senate for the, quote, authority of law, the power of the general government, unquote. But he was not referring to Alabama, Georgia, and the Indians. He was talking about South Carolina's nullification of the tariff. Despite the hardships, the Creeks refused to budge. But by 1836, both state and federal officials decided they must go. Using as a pretext some attacks by desperate Creeks on white settlers, it was declared that the Creek Nation, by making war, had forfeited its treaty rights. The army would now force it to migrate west. Fewer than 100 Creeks had been involved in the war, but 1,000 had fled into the woods, afraid of white reprisals. An army of 11,000 was sent after them. The Creeks did not resist. No shots were fired. They surrendered. Those Creeks, presumed by the army to be rebels or sympathizers, were assembled, the men manacled and chained together, to march westward under military guard, their women and children trailing after them. Creek communities were invaded by military detachments, the inhabitants driven to assembly points and marched westward in batches of 2,000 or 3,000, no talk of compensating them for land or property left behind. Private contracts were made for the march.
Okay. So through all of this, I just keep wondering if there was a different cultural zeitgeist at play. Not one that spoke of manifest destiny, not one that spoke of constant need for westward expansion to supply capitalism. If there was a different sort of, as I say, cultural zeitgeist, could things have gone differently in terms of the Europeans learning to live side by side with the people whose lands they were, invading just by coming there in the first place? And of course, this is generations past when the first settlers settled permanently in Jamestown. But still, I feel like I would say that yes, there is that possibility that things could have been different. And I take, for example, the missionaries that they just brought up. These missionaries that were down in Georgia advocating for an independent and free Cherokee nation. Now, if that was more the mainstream view, I'd say there's a distinct possibility that things would have played out very differently. Um, and I think also of say the Quakers throughout most of their history on this continent, opposing slavery, opposing war, opposing all kinds of brutality, trying to have parity between men and women. Uh, those were possibilities at the time in terms of ways of thinking that could have become the dominant narrative, but for whatever reason it didn't. But I think had it been more prevalent, or something like it, you can look at any number of more egalitarian movements. It seems like things would have gone differently, despite all the technological dominance that Europeans had on the continent. So, I mean, obviously it's a counterfactual. There's no way to ever prove how things would have gone. I just find it interesting to think about because today we have sets of principles that uphold capitalism as the highest and best system we can ever hope to accomplish. Any sort of communist idea has been viciously suppressed, especially since the time of the Red Scare. Same thing with anarchism as well. People literally were executed for their anarchist ideologies. I think a little over 100 years ago, that was the case. So that, I mean, to me, that gives me hope that the, the culture is not set in stone. We can choose to believe in something better. We can choose to try and persuade others to believe in something better. And when enough of us come together and not just believe in something better, but try for something better, perhaps we can at least eke out some semblance of what we want. In spite of the cultural hegemony of capitalism, white supremacy, male supremacy, so on and so forth. All the typical chains that you hear about that bind most people down. And that's true. Rich white dudes would have no part of it, but rich white dudes are heavily outnumbered, and it just gets worse year by year as fewer and fewer people are able to, say, buy houses, join the middle class, even in any meaningful way. Wealth just keeps getting siphoned up higher and higher to fewer and fewer hands. I mean, eventually there's going to be virtually no rich people, but those few left will have like everything. I don't know. I guess these are the questions to ponder. And ads. All right. Thanks for the heads up. We'll wait a minute or so until James says that he's back from the ads break. But you're right, James. You can't just push aside the dominant cultural hegemony. It will come back to bite you in the ass. They will viciously suppress you. But it seems like there are certain, I don't even know what to call them, certain points. It's very hard for me to put words to what I'm trying to think. There's certain things about this culture that once you get to a certain status or have a certain bit of leverage, it's very hard to push you back down. One of those things being home ownership. When you have home ownership, you can't be threatened by a rent hike. You can't be threatened to be evicted. There's very little that the moneyed class can do to you in terms of taking away your home. I mean, they could take away your job, most likely. But if you had enough people like you supporting one another, then you could all just make your own businesses. And there is part two. So because our culture is... Okay, that's good, James. Glad to hear it. Oh, and I don't know if you're here earlier, but I finally made enough money through people like you watching ads and subbing and donating and stuff like that that I actually got a payout from Twitch. So it's actually made me a little bit of money. It was only like $70 for almost 2 years of streaming. And let's see, I'm way over 100 videos now. Let's see how many. I'm going off on a side tangent, but I don't care. We're going to ride this wave. My channel, I don't know how to even see how many I have, how many I'm up to. Videos. Anyway, I'm well past the 100 mark in terms of videos. And my average video is like 2 hours long. So hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours for $70. Not exactly making minimum wage yet, but anyway. So back to what I was talking about. Because our Constitution specifically, but just most of the laws that are made in general, are there to protect property, anyone that then has property has a special status. And there's nothing that says that once you have a special status, you have to act like everyone else that, well, not everyone else, but the majority of people that have that special status. So if you have a house, doesn't mean you have to kick out homeless people from your city or advocate for like tent cities to be torn down, or, you know, you can be the one to stick up for a homeless shelter being built in your neighborhood, or even better than that, a housing first policy being enacted by your city. So, and as I said, by you being a homeowner yourself, if you happen to find yourself in that lucky position, you are in a much better leverage point to not be getting a whole lot of backlash legally and, you know, just through the soft power of social pressure to, you know, shut up about it. The same is true of owning a business. Just because you find yourself a business owner doesn't mean you have to run it like every other capitalist business. You could turn it into a really good worker cooperative where people elect their bosses, where people have a say in the running of things. Question is getting there in the first place, but my thought is that if enough people can get to that position where, say, you have a worker cooperative that is stable, that has a product that's not likely to be, you know, something that's a very elastic demand. So you want to have something that's inelastic in demand, something that people always need. Food comes to mind, but it could be things like transportation. It could be any number of things that people need that they're always going to be a demand for. If enough people were in that business, they could start putting aside money to help others get to their same position. And then one by one, cooperative can spawn cooperative can spawn cooperative. And if enough of those cooperatives get together, they can start doing even bigger things with those leverage points that they now have to, say, start providing free housing. Not just low-income housing, not just, you know, affordable priced condominiums, but free housing. So you could set up a system where you build a housing complex, and that anyone that lives there is free to do so as long as they like. I might even say they're not able to sell that property to anybody, but they can use it as long as they want. The only fees collected would be similar to an HOA, but it would just go towards the maintenance of the building itself, not towards any sort of profit for anybody. You know, perhaps a rainy day fund, but all in the service of maintaining the building so that it doesn't fall apart. The idea being building sustainability. And once you have that done, you could build another one. And all the people that are now in that first housing, it's not even a cooperative at that point. I don't know what you'd even call it. But this first free housing block, by, you know, they're now increased leverage, getting my words mixed up here, but they're better position, their advantages that they now find themselves in by not having to worry about housing and not being able to be threatened to be kicked out of housing, and then perhaps being a part of one of the worker cooperatives that created that housing. You can see how the momentum could start to build using the protected parts of capitalism against the system itself. And that's different. You're going to have the immediate criticism that, oh, you can't use the system against itself. Oh, the master's tools will never destroy the master's house. But I mean, for one thing, that's not how tools work. You can use a hammer to build a house, and you can use one to knock one down. I mean, same thing is true of a saw. You can use it to cut lumber to dimension, or you can use it to destroy things. So literally, that's not how tools work. But also, it's not just reformism. And really, that's what people are getting at when they say you can't use the system against itself. The system is unreformable. But we're not talking about reforms, because no legislation needs pass. You might need to have people in positions of power to prevent legislation against these sorts of business and housing configurations. But there's nothing really stopping you from doing it now, aside from likely lack of capital to do so. Lack of startup funds, that is to say. Oh, that's true, James. Facebook and YouTube have not given me a dime. I'm not even monetized on YouTube at all. I have, how many subscribers now? I have 115 subscribers on YouTube. You need something like 2,000 just to get monetization. So yeah, anyone that happens to look at my videos on YouTube, all that money goes straight to YouTube. Same thing with Facebook. I use YouTube as more of an archives of the show, so that people can go back and watch stuff at their leisure and stuff like that. So I'm putting it out for free. This is definitely a labor of love. I'm nowhere near at the point of self-sufficiency when it comes to streaming. That would be really cool if I could get to that point, but this is just not where I'm at yet. And I'm happy with that. I'm happy where I'm at. Happy chatting with all of you every week now, hopefully, again, getting back into a regular schedule. But I digress. So what I was saying was, I wouldn't really call what I was talking about informing worker-owned cooperatives, and I would say resident managed housing might be a term. I'm sure there's no way I'm the first person to think of this sort of a situation, but there's got to be some term for it where everyone who lives, maybe not even everyone that lives in the well, probably be better to be managed by the people that actually live there. So everyone in a residential block, call it a condo complex if you like, because they would be real homes. You wouldn't be paying rent on it. There'd be no landlord. So it would be, in that sense, closer to a housing cooperative. But at the same time, no one could sell it, because my idea is that long term, we want to do away with this idea that to get housing, you have to basically sign your life away to a bank to get a mortgage. So like someone pays off an entire house or a condo unit. Let's just say a condo unit. That's been paid for. And then they decide to move, they die, whatever. Someone comes and occupies that unit. Why should they have to start that whole process over again and pay for what has already been paid for? Paying for upkeep, sure, but that's what the HOA goes to. So beyond an HOA, I can't see any need to pay a mortgage or to profit off of having a place to live. It should just be something that's due to people for being alive. So it would be like it would be like a housing cooperative. It's just you'd have the extra provision that you couldn't sell it. Not that you couldn't leave, you could just vacate, and then whoever's next on the list gets that unit. And that way, if enough of these were put together in cities all over the place, you'd have a network of free, like really free housing, as free as it could possibly be, without some sort of organized intervention to, pay for upkeep. Because you could do it that way too. This could be through the government. A local government could just provide housing, only charge upkeep fees, and that's it. Charge no other rent, and then otherwise you treat that place as though you own it, as, any condo owner would their unit. The only catch being that once you leave, you don't get to make a profit off of it. You don't get to sell it to anyone. You just vacate, you move your stuff to another place, hopefully another place that is like what you are coming from, a place where you don't have to pay to get in there. And then the next person doesn't have to pay anything to get into that unit either, aside from monthly upkeep fees. But then the added benefit of doing it through the government could be, through the local government, that is, it could be that, for one, you could have the same people maintaining the property, doing the lawn, if there is such a one, maintaining the outside grounds, maintaining the common places, doing repairs, the same things that any condo association or homeowners association would provide. So you could get a better deal on that. You can, if a handful of companies were servicing all the different properties, so it'd be less costly in that regard. But then also, you could just levy a tax, and taxes would go to pay for housing, which is even more fair than directly getting maintenance fees from people that live in the units. And then you wouldn't have to worry about collecting anything from anybody, which would be yet another benefit to that. And then people could just live and never have to worry about ending up on the street, as long as they like to stay in that place, or could find another place with a similar situation. And think of how much money that would free up for other things, this paying for all of life's necessities directly for the individual. All that does is take away money that could go to other stuff, to pursuing, whatever makes people happy instead, which, would benefit the economy as well, instead of all this large chunk of people's income every year just going to people who already have tons of money, who are never going to spend it in a lifetime, aka landlords. That money could be used for any number of things, for helping other people into better situations, for starting new businesses, new cooperatives, new housing cooperatives. It could create kind of a cascading effect if enough people got into it and got the ball rolling and got the momentum going, with the aim of just creating more and more, freedom, I would say. That's how I would put it. Freeing people up from the burdens of finding and paying for shelter. And then you could just, go on from there. Apply it to transportation. Make mass transit free for everybody. To the end user, pay for it through taxes, or through combining other services. Say you have a transit line, and you put solar panels or wind turbines on top of it, and then sell the power that comes from that. Another way to generate revenue. Just the amount of stimulation to the economy that free transportation would bring, that now people have access to jobs where they otherwise might not, because they don't have enough reliable private transportation, or there's not a bus line that runs at the right time or close enough, or goes close enough to where they need to go. All these sorts of impediments would be opened up by just making a mass transit system robust and free to the end user. So you could do that. You could open up the education to anyone who's in that case, you could still have testing in order to get into certain classes or fields or whatever. It's not as though you have to do away with expertise standards at that point, because we still want to have competent doctors and lawyers and architects and civil engineers and so on and so forth. But just take away the debt, the cost. So you're making people even more free, even more able to pursue happiness. Apply that to food. Start growing campaigns across entire municipalities to boost food security, but then also provide as many fruits and vegetables and simple baking ingredients as anyone would ever need. You take that away, you free people up even more. You know, these sorts of things could start, in my opinion, with housing. That being it seems to me housing is the number one thing. It's kind of the nexus of everything. It's hard to worry about, or it's hard to even find, stable employment, know where you're going to need transportation. It's hard to manage any of the other needs if you don't even have shelter, just basic, secure, stable shelter. So to me, that's kind of the nexus of everything. So I think that's kind of where a good leftist movement of building dual power could start, either there or with business, just starting a worker-owned cooperative, changing and getting rid of the tyranny of the workplace, of a boss that can command all the resources available to the company, who can hire and fire on a whim, who can, impose arbitrary standards, all these sorts of things. Kick the tyrants out of business. That could be another point. So I think between those 2 points, and because, as I say, so many of the U.S.'s laws and Constitution revolves around property ownership, both in the personal sense of your personal home, but also private property in terms of property that is used to make a living. Focus on those 2 things, and it's kind of hard to oppose it if enough people are doing it. It'd be nigh on impossible without drastically rewriting the Constitution or tons of local laws or what have you. And by freeing enough people and making sure that elections are still open and free and fair, the more people you free, then the less likelihood that anyone could pass legislation in opposition to a movement like that would be. Because, what's the number one thing that stops people from voting? It's not just apathy. It's, I got to work 5 jobs to survive. My boss won't give me time off, even though they're legally required to. But what are you going to do? Sue me? I'm your boss. I'll just fire you. And you really need this job, and I know that. So all these pressure points that stifle people from voting that really need to be exercising as much power as they can, those can be eliminated by that sort of thing. This is a long digression, and I apologize if you just want to get to the book. But hey, if you've been on this stream for long enough, you know that oftentimes the book is just a jumping off point, more or less, and that a lot of what we talk about is kind of relating it to the modern day and looking at these systems that run throughout time and space, especially when it comes to capitalism, especially when it comes to manifest destiny and white supremacy, all these things. Yeah, and I do appreciate you reminding me that James. Off topic is still topic. So I'm happy to take these diversions. So partially it's just my ADD brain. Though I don't know if I should say that. I've never been formally diagnosed, but I'm pretty damn sure that I have ADD. It is incredibly hard for me to manage a schedule. It's incredibly hard for me to be on time to things, even when I know that I need to be on time to things. And my brain goes on tangents quite a bit. On the flip side, the thing that threw me the longest throughout my life was I've always been able to hyper focus on something that really interests me, whether that was permaculture or politics or, yeah, thank you, Alexis. I appreciate that. And welcome. I don't think I've seen you in the chat before, but thanks for being here. Anyway, I've always been able to hyper focus on something if it really interests me. So like I said, permaculture, politics. When I was little, dinosaurs. I could watch dinosaur videos forever, and I did. And in preschool, I memorized the name of probably 100 dinosaurs, which I still remember. And the big ones, too. Parasaurolophus, Pachycephalosaurus, Deinonychus, and I think it might be Deinonychus, but Diplodocus, Coelophysis. I could go on and on and on, and I could do that at 4 or 5 years old. I couldn't read, but I'd watched those videos so many times and focused on the names of them so many times that I knew it all. And, I was always like that kid who was gifted at things, but just never able to apply themselves very well. I've had a lot of trouble just following through with projects and stuff like that throughout my life, which is, this stream has been really great for me because it's been something that I can, for whatever reason, I guess just because I'm interested in it, um, which, that doesn't mean I'm not interested in other things. So, anyway. Anyway, I guess because this is something that I can, for whatever reason, keep a schedule on and do week after week after week, I feel like, we've accomplished something here. We've gotten through a bunch of books. We've gotten through a lot of different theories. We've watched a lot of videos, and I feel good about the content that I've created. Yeah, with ADHD, with ADD, your brain can get up and go when it's excited about whatever you want it, whatever you want to do. Something with chemicals being released, I believe. Yeah, I'm not sure what it is. And if I ever, well, I shouldn't say if I ever, I need to get health care back. I mean, I have dental care right now. I eventually need to get to a point where I'm financially stable enough to afford medical care as well. And at that point, I will start exploring perhaps getting some medication for it. Because as much as ADD can be a benefit, like I know a hell of a lot about very narrow subjects like permaculture, like politics, still like dinosaurs. I'd like to function better at my job, in my relationships with people, not forget important things that I don't want to forget. That it's not as though it's not interesting or important to me. It's just, for some reason, it just doesn't stick, especially schedules. Schedules are really tough for me. Just this morning, I had thought that I had put the morning meeting at 6 a.m. at my work for our snow meeting for all the foremen. I'm going to be a snow removal foreman this winter. I do landscaping during the summer. And it was an important meeting, and I thought I'd put it in my calendar, but for whatever reason I didn't. And of course, because it wasn't in my calendar, I totally spaced it. So I got in 6:30. Meeting was long over at that point. Didn't end up missing anything terribly important. He just unveiled the pay rates and stuff like that. But still, it's just those things. Like I want to be that guy that remembers the meeting at work, or remembers to call back a client. There's a client that I got to call back about doing maintenance for gardening for them for next year. That just haven't, because it's not on my to-do list. I haven't gotten to it. Wow. So there's an even bigger tangent than what we were on before. But anyway, I think at this point we can get back to the book. Let's see. We only have 20 minutes left in this chapter, and the last 5 minutes are usually discussion from the narrator. So let's see what we can do.
The same kind that had failed for the Choctaws. Again, delays and lack of food, shelter, clothing, blankets, medical attention. Again, old, rotting steamboats and ferries, crowded beyond capacity, taking them across the Mississippi. Quote, by midwinter, the interminable, stumbling procession of more than 15,000 creeks stretched from border to border across Arkansas, unquote. Starvation and sickness began to cause large numbers of deaths. Quote, the passage of the exiles could be distinguished from afar by the howling of trailing wolf packs and the circling flocks of buzzards.
Yeah, that certainly puts it in perspective, doesn't it? I mean, this is why this period of Native American removal was called the Trail of Tears, because there was just so much mass death that happened because of this trail of howling wolves and flocks of buzzards. As though it's out of, an exaggerated cartoon or something. But no, I would bet that this is a real account of what happened. Because, here we go. Let's look this up. This will be a relevant tangent, but let's see how many people they estimate died on the Trail of Tears. This is not going to be a fun statistic to look up, but it's important. Boy, not doing well with the typing here. This is teachinghistory.org. 16,000 Cherokees were removed, and about 4,000 perished. So so I didn't realize the Trail of Tears refers specifically to Cherokee removal. So I guess that wouldn't even apply to the Choctaw, the Seminole, and the Creek that were also removed. That's 1 in 4. 1 in 4 people died on their way to Oklahoma. I'm gonna link. I'll link this. It's an incredibly long link, but my God, that's one of those stats that just kind of takes your breath away. There you go. You can look it up for yourself. In the name of civilization, according to Andrew Jackson. I mean, I assume that meets the threshold for genocide at that point. Killing 1 of every 4 of an ethnic group by purposely relocating them on a forced march without a care of whether or not they die. Okay. I don't know. I don't have a lot more to add. That's just horrifying.
Van Every writes, 800 Creek men had volunteered to help the United States Army fight the Seminoles in Florida in return for a promise that their families could remain in Alabama.
Listen to the desperation. Willing to turn on their former neighbors just for a promise that they wouldn't be slaughtered or removed, which would likely lead to their death as well.
Protected by the federal government until the men returned. The promise was not kept. The Creek families were attacked by land-hungry white marauders.
How about
robbed,
that?
driven
Another
from their
broken
homes,
promise.
Women raped. Then the Army, claiming it was for their safety, removed them from Creek country to a concentration camp on Mobile Bay. Hundreds died there from lack of food and from sickness. When the warriors returned from the Seminole War, they and their families were hustled west. Moving through New Orleans, they encountered a yellow fever plague. They crossed the Mississippi. 611 Indians crowded onto the aged steamer Monmouth. It went down in the Mississippi River, and 311 people died, 4 of them the children of the Indian commander of the Creek Volunteers in Florida. A New Orleans newspaper wrote, quote, "The federal responsibility for this vast sacrifice of human life rests on the contractors. The avaricious disposition to increase the profits on the speculation first induced the chartering of rotten, old, unseaworthy boats because they were of a class to be procured cheaply. And then to make those increased profits still larger, the Indians were packed upon those crazy vessels in such crowds that not even the slightest regard seems to have been paid to their safety, comfort, or even decency." Unquote.
So, if you are, excuse me, if you find yourself relating any part of the story to someone else, and they're pushing back at you and saying, "Oh, this is just stuff made up to make white people feel bad about themselves and their history and stuff like that," point them out, or point out that time and time again, Zinn is using as primary of sources as he possibly can. This is a newspaper account, so this may be edited down. This may not be a direct firsthand account, but as much as he can, he takes direct quotes from people and newspaper clippings and just opinion polls and stuff like he does his due diligence to find out what the attitudes of the day were, and as close as possible what the actual facts on the ground were. This is not just speculation. This is not just whipping up anti-white sentiment or anything like that. It's taking a clear-eyed look at history, as getting as close to the truth as is possible, not having lived through the era yourself.
Quote. The Choctaws and Chickasaws had quickly agreed to migrate. The Creeks were stubborn and had to be forced. The Cherokees were practicing nonviolent resistance. One tribe, the Seminoles, decided to fight. With Florida now belonging to the United States, Seminole territory was open to American land grabbers. They moved down into North Florida from St. Augustine to Pensacola and down the fertile coastal strip. In 1823, the Treaty of Camp Moultrie was signed by a few Seminoles who got large personal land holdings in North Florida and agreed that all the Seminoles would leave northern Florida and every coastal area and move into the interior. This meant withdrawing into the swamps of central Florida, where they could not grow food, where even wild game could not survive. The pressure to move west out of Florida mounted, and in 1834, Seminole leaders were assembled, and the U.S. Indian agent told them they must move west. Here were some of the replies of the Seminoles at that meeting. Quote, "We were all made by the same great Father, and are alike his children. We all came from the same mother, and were suckled at the same breast. Therefore we are brothers, and as brothers should treat each other in an amicable way."
It just baffles the mind that anyone could view the settlers of that day, or not even necessarily the settlers themselves, but the people pushing settlement, the politicians, the rich landowners, the speculators, that sort of thing, as somehow bastions of civilization, keeping up the civilized races of people, and that these natives were somehow savage and backwards and anything like that, when, once again, a primary quote from a Native American leader, very eloquent, poetic, and showing so much more humanity and compassion for people that are literally slaughtering them and pushing them out of their land, and could care less if they, or could not care less if they all just vanished off the earth. But again, I mean, let's keep it in perspective. That doesn't mean there was, let's not promote that narrative of the noble savage, that every Native American was just inherently morally better than every white person, or vice versa. There are more and less moral and good people on every side. What matters most is who holds the reins of power and who controls the cultural narratives that propel civilizations forward or not. But yeah, that really hits you. We were, and this person, from their perspective, it would be hard to imagine not hating the people that came in, saw you as devils of one kind or another, and certainly subhuman compared to them, and started slaughtering you and your families and your children, pushing you out of your land. It would be hard to think of those people as the same as you, and yet here you have basically this leader saying, we're all of the same mother. We are all human, recognizing the humanity in your oppressor. That's wow. It's very powerful.
Quote, Your talk is a good one, but my people cannot say they will go. We are not willing to do so. If their tongues say yes, their hearts cry no and call them liars. Quote, if suddenly we tear our hearts from the homes around which they are twined, our heartstrings will snap. The Indian agent managed to get 15 chiefs and sub-chiefs to sign a removal treaty. The U.S. Senate promptly ratified it, and the War Department began making preparations for migration.
It's like, and again, I always come back to what would the alternative have been? Like, this is a horrible thing for any of these leaders to have to go through, knowing that there's probably 100% certainty that none of those people under their leadership would ever see their homeland again. They would be moving into part of the continent that likely none of them had ever been to, encountering people that they would have never otherwise encountered, in a very different climate than Florida, a place where there's actually snow and, tornadoes. There might be tornadoes in Florida. Certainly hurricanes are pretty bad. But regardless, a totally foreign place to them. But what else do you do? Like they said they tried to keep fighting. They would go into the uninhabitable parts of Florida, which is all of Florida. No, I'm just kidding. They would go into the swamplands to seek refuge from the settlers, but there's only so long they could stay because it was inhospitable even for people that were born and raised there and knew the local flora and fauna and how to survive. It was just not a good place to survive. I remember there was a while that I was trying to get into survivalism and living out on your own on the land and stuff like that. And there was a survival manual that I found. And when it got to the part of what to do when you find yourself lost in various biomes, when it got to swampland, it basically summed up by saying, try not to get lost in the swamp. It's just, your odds are not good. And I laugh, but this is really grim stuff, applying it to what we're talking about. It's just that I'm just laughing at the enormity of the horrific. It's I don't know, hard to explain. So yeah, what else do you do? I mean, I suppose they could have just gone all out guerrilla warfare. Really, when you have an empire that is very technologically advanced, that seems to have infinite supplies, supply lines that run half a world away. They can get goods shipped to them from the old world, labor shipped to them from Africa and the old world. What do you do to oppose that? Because as long as that those goods and labor are being shipped in, there's not a lot that they can't accomplish if they set their mind to it. And they can use every sort of, ad hoc, backwards justification for doing what they do. The March of Progress, the March of Civilization, on and on and on. And if doing so means they will get a huge reward for themselves and their immediate families, there's a good likelihood that they will take that stance, that what they're doing is justified. So what do you do in the face of that? Really, the only Achilles heel of advanced, energy-intensive civilizations that I can see is just supply line disruption. That's about it. That is kind of that one thing that, as we've seen with COVID, if you're able to disrupt that, well, then you actually do stand a chance of getting them out of your country eventually. But, that is what happened in Afghanistan. After 20 years, America had just lost its desire to keep pouring money and energy and resources into stabilizing that land. Same thing happened in the last several wars that we fought that were actually referred to as wars, Vietnam, Korea, eventually the beast was worn down. The beast of imperialism was worn down just through disruption of supplies, making it so costly to remain that eventually enough people are like, what are we even doing here? Why are we fighting for this piece of land that doesn't really get us much of anything except maybe a symbolic victory over communism or whatever. So that's really the only thing that I can even come up with that these tribes could have done to resist colonialism. Just constant guerrilla style supply line disruption. Because they were spread out over quite a large geographical area and depended on delicate supply lines from very far away. That's the thing, is like individually these tribes probably didn't stand much of a chance even using those tactics. It probably would have taken quite the coordinated effort between many different tribes in many different places to ever oppose and even reverse westward expansion. And perhaps at that point, I don't know, maybe, I suppose it's possible that the U.S. would have changed its tune and its attitude towards the natives. It might have just doubled down, though, at the same time and been like, oh, look at them, they literally want us all dead. They're destroying our sustenance. We have to just push them out into the sea. Hard to know, though. Hard to know. Anyway, let's continue on. We're getting pretty close to the end here.
Violence between whites and Seminoles now erupted. A young Seminole chief, Osceola, who had been imprisoned and chained by the Indian agent Thompson, and whose wife had been delivered into slavery, became a leader of the growing resistance. When Thompson ordered the Seminoles in December 1835 to assemble for the journey, no one came. Instead, the Seminoles began a series of guerrilla attacks on white coastal settlements all along the Florida perimeter, striking in surprise and in succession from the interior. They murdered white families, captured slaves, destroyed property. Osceola himself, in a lightning stroke, shot down Thompson and an Army lieutenant. That same day, December 28, 1835, a column of 110 soldiers was attacked by Seminoles. All but 3 soldiers were killed. One of the survivors later told the story. Quote, "It was 8 o'clock. Suddenly I heard a rifle shot, followed by a musket shot. I had not time to think of the meaning of these shots before a volley, as if from 1,000 rifles, was poured in upon us from the front, and all along our left flank. I could only see their heads and arms peering out from the long grass far and near and from behind the pine trees." It was the classic Indian tactic against a foe with superior firearms. General George Washington had once given parting advice to one of his officers. Quote, "General St. Clair, in 3 words, beware of surprise. Again and again, General, beware of surprise." Congress now appropriated money for a war against the Seminoles. In the Senate, Henry Clay of Kentucky opposed the war. He was an enemy of Jackson, a critic of Indian removal, but his Whig colleague, Daniel Webster, displayed that unity across party lines, which became standard in American wars. Quote, "The view taken by the gentleman from Kentucky was undoubtedly the true one, but the war rages. The enemy is in force, and the accounts of their ravages are disastrous. The executive government has asked for the means of suppressing these hostilities, and it was entirely proper that the bill should pass." General Winfield Scott took charge, but his columns of troops, marching impressively into Seminole territory, found no one. They became tired of the mud, the swamps, the heat, the sickness, the hunger, the classic fatigue of a civilized army fighting people on their own land.
There you go.
No one wanted to face Seminoles in the Florida swamps. In 1836, 103 commissioned officers resigned from the regular army, leaving only 46.
So I found a movie about this Seminole uprising here. Looks like it's told from the only the white perspective, but it might be interesting to check out at some point just to see more information about this, because this is definitely something that I think this was kind of very lightly glanced over in, I don't remember which history class. It might have even been a college history class on the Native Americans. But yeah, so I was only vaguely aware of the Seminole Uprising. So it looks like there's that. Well, let's see if we can find any other information about this. Yeah, it's just going to refer to this one movie. Yeah. Let's see if we can find any other material on something similar. Oh, there's a movie called Seminole with Rock Hudson. What is this one about? Yeah, looks like your classic Western chauvinist movie. Yeah, here's the description. Supposedly impeding the development of white civilization, the Seminoles must be expelled from their native lands at all costs. Yeah, that pretty much tells you the stance of that. Still, might be interesting to check out just to see what people have thought about this over the years. But yeah, be interesting to know if there's more stuff out there in media on the subject, because it's pretty interesting and I didn't really know much about it yet.
In the spring of 1837, Major General Jessup moved into the war with an army of 10,000, but the Seminoles just faded into the swamps, coming out from time to strike at isolated forces. The war went on for years. The army enlisted other Indians to fight the Seminoles, but that didn't work either. Van Every says, quote, "The adaptation of the Seminole to his environment was to be matched only by the crane or the alligator," unquote. It was an 8-year war. It cost $20 million and 1,500 American lives. Finally, in the 1840s, the Seminoles began to get tired. They were a tiny group against a huge nation with great resources. They asked for truces, but when they went forward under truce flags, they were arrested again and again. In 1837, Osceola, under a flag of truce, had been seized and put in irons, then died of illness in prison. The war petered out. Meanwhile, the Cherokees had not fought back with arms, but had resisted in their own way, and so the government began to play Cherokee against Cherokee, the old game. The pressures built up on the Cherokee community. Their newspaper suppressed, their government dissolved, the missionaries in jail, their land parceled among whites by the land lottery. In 1834, 700 Cherokees, weary of the struggle, agreed to go west. 81 died en route, including 45 children. Mostly from measles and cholera, those who lived arrived at their destination across the Mississippi in the midst of a cholera epidemic, and half of them died within a year. The Cherokees were summoned to sign the removal treaty in New Echota, Georgia, in 1836, but fewer than 500 of the 17,000 Cherokees appeared. The treaty was signed anyway. The Senate, including Northerners who had once spoke for the Indian, ratified it, yielding, as Senator Edward Everett of Massachusetts said, to, quote, "the force of circumstances, the hard necessity." Now the Georgia whites step up their attacks to speed the removal. The government did not move immediately against the Cherokees. In April 1838, Ralph Waldo Emerson addressed an open letter to President Van Buren, referring with indignation to the removal treaty with the Cherokees, signed behind the backs of an overwhelming majority of them, and asked what had happened to the sense of justice in America. Quote, "The soul of man, the justice, the mercy that is the heart's heart in all men from Maine to Georgia, does abhor this business. A crime is projected that confounds our understandings by its magnitude, a crime that really deprives us as well as the Cherokees of a country. For how could we call the conspiracy that should crush these poor Indians our government? Or the land that was cursed by their parting and dying imprecations our country
Okay,
anymore?
I see where he's going with that now.
You, sir,
It's a little better.
bring down that renowned chair in which you sit into infamy if your seal is set to this instrument of perfidy. And the name of this nation, hitherto the sweet omen of religion and liberty, will stink to the world. 13 days before Emerson sent this letter, Martin Van Buren had ordered Major General Winfield Scott into Cherokee territory to use whatever military force was required to move the Cherokees west. 5 regiments of regulars and 4,000 militia and volunteers began pouring into Cherokee country. General Scott addressed the Indians, quote, "Cherokees, the President of the United States has sent me with a powerful army to cause you, in obedience to the Treaty of 1834, to join that part of your people who are already established in prosperity on the other side of the Mississippi. The full moon of May is already on the wane, and before another shall have passed, every Cherokee man, woman, and child must be in motion to join their brethren in the far west. My troops already occupy many positions in the country that you are about to abandon, and thousands are approaching from every quarter to tender resistance and escape alike hopeless. Chiefs, headmen, and warriors, will you then by resistance compel us to resort to arms? God forbid. Or will you, by flight, seek to hide yourselves in mountains and forests, and thus oblige us to hunt you down?" Some Cherokees had apparently given up on nonviolence. 3 chiefs who signed the removal treaty were found dead. But the 17,000 Cherokees were soon rounded up and crowded into stockades. On October 1st, 1838, the first detachment set out in what was to be known as the Trail of Tears. As they moved westward, they began to die. Of sickness, of drought, of the heat, of exposure. There were 645 wagons and people marching alongside. Survivors, years later, told of halting at the edge of the Mississippi in the middle of winter, the river running full of ice. Quote, "Hundreds of sick and dying penned up in wagons or stretched upon the ground," unquote. Grant Foreman, the leading authority on Indian removal, estimates that during confinement in the stockade or on the march westward, 4,000 Cherokees died. In December 1838, President Van Buren spoke to Congress, quote, "It affords sincere pleasure to apprise the Congress of the entire removal of the Cherokee Nation of Indians to their new homes west of the Mississippi. The measures authorized by Congress at its last session have had the happiest effects," unquote. So ends Chapter 7 of Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States, which begins to cover the many atrocities delivered upon Native Americans at the hands of the United States government.
There you have it. We got to the end of that chapter. And once again, for whatever reason, when dealing with chapters, every chapter that we've had that mentions Native Americans, somehow they've always gotten the absolute worst treatment. I mean, I guess it's not a competition or anything, so slavery would definitely be in the running as well, but so forced immigrants would definitely be on that list as well, but the U.S. government absolutely hates natives. Just such disdain for them. Doesn't matter how many pretty speeches they make, how many pleas for mercy, how many appeals to common humanity they make. They just want them gone. They just want plunder. It's so fucking greedy for land, for just stealing resources. Yeah. And eventually we'll probably cover an indigenous people's history of the United States as well. It's a lot. It is definitely a lot. Yes, they did celebrate that. I found another movie too that seems to deal at least somewhat with the events of this seminal war. It's called Naked in the Sun. Came out eventually. It came out in 1957. It was originally rejected by the APA or the PCA. What was it? What is the name of it? Oh, PCA. Whatever board that is didn't grant approval for the picture until 1957 because there was depiction of a premarital affair and some nudity in a bathing scene. Um, but it seems just from the brief synopsis that I read that it might at least have a little more charitable view of the natives' position during this war. So there's something else to maybe check out. Um, Definitely deals with Osceola, who was just mentioned in this chapter. Seemed like a pretty cool dude, I gotta say. You know, he definitely saw the writing on the wall, the way that the U.S. government was just never going to back down, and did what he could to oppose it. They just sounds like they just ran out of steam eventually, because yeah, the U.S. was just so resourced and had such an ability to just keep calling up military and provisions and technology and so on and so forth that it sounds like they just got worn down. So they even, they even tried that one, you know, glimmer of hope of a strategy that I was mentioning, just attacking supply lines, using guerrilla style warfare. It still was not enough. And, Cherokee, who tried to assimilate, not enough. 1 out of 4 of them ended up dying. Of the meager amount that was even left at that point. Wow. Wow. What a thing. Just wrapping up. Don't worry. Man, it doesn't like when I go past 9 o'clock. And here we are at 9:05. So,
Yeah.
that's a heavy one. It's going to take some time to reset after that one.
It's one of those moments where you need to watch cartoons to recover from it because it was really traumatic.
This was a pretty bad one. The Andrew Jackson,
Is a piece of shit.
once again, the worst president in history, just utterly racist against Native Americans. No matter what they did, tried to assimilate, didn't matter. Tried to oppose them with guerrilla warfare, didn't matter. Just shooty, booty, booting them out of their own country. That is to say. That was his strategy. And then he was always going to come up with some reason to do just that.
Violence doesn't help folks unless they don't hear you.
Well, I mean, the Seminoles chose violence and were successful for a while, more successful than others that tried more appeasement and assimilation. Because, like the book mentioned, 1 in 4 Cherokees died on the Trail of Tears. 1 in 4.
Did you get to smallpox blankets, or is that later?
He did not mention that, and I've heard different accounts that may be apocryphal. That's just maybe it's something that was more one of those legends that kind of got spun up from just the horrific nature of the whole thing. But anyway, Zinn chose not to mention that part. So I don't know. He didn't mention why though either. So I have no idea if that's just something that's gained more cultural currency in the intervening years, or what the reason it was.
I find that to be.
Let's see, who should we raid now? We got a number of people in chat. If you have anyone you'd like me to raid, now is the time to sing it out. Oh, not 5 more ads. Oh, I'm so sorry, James. If anyone has anyone they'd like me to raid on who's on Twitch, let me know. Otherwise, we'll just we'll pick someone. Let's see who is on. Seems like we've raided a lot of these people fairly recently.
I don't know if I can believe
I don't know if I want to subject you all to modern day debates after this,
Ooh, who are we
because
gonna fight?
as good as the leftists they get on there are, the chuds are just unbearable, intolerable, the worst sorts. It's Stephen Molyneux types. In fact, he's been on there several times. So I can usually do about 20 minutes of modern day debates, and that's my limit because I just cannot stand the right wingers on there that much. Um,
Interesting, the Department of Education denies that it happened, but according to this native teaching aids that's run by natives states that yes, it did happen.
okay. I'm willing to believe it either way. I mean, if it never happened, it still was incredible, intolerable cruelty and genocide that took place. So it doesn't need that to happen for it to have been just an utter travesty of a time in history. And then again, if it didn't happen, I guess I wouldn't be surprised either that they intentionally slaughtered and genocided those people even more. So I guess either one could be true.
They said they came from an infected military site, the blankets. So, like, just with the history that was there, it seems like that is something manipulative enough that the US would have done to the natives.
Trail of Tears beans? There's a bean called Trail of Tears? Oh shit, that's pretty heavy. No, I have not. Debate culture has no redeeming quality. I disagree a little bit on that. I don't think it's nearly as much relevancy or usefulness as most debate bros seem to believe that it is. Like I really don't think that millions of people are going to be swayed by just a really really good argument. The people that tend to really be swayed easily by debates seem to be the same sort of people that are always just looking for the strongest and best leader to follow. So if it happens to be one of the main debate bros on the left today, then sure they'll be a leftist and until Ben Shabibo makes a really good argument and owns the libs again, and then it seems like they'll just be right back over there. And that's being reductionist. I'm not being entirely charitable to the art form. For myself, basically, the value of debate bros is one. I like to argue myself. I enjoy arguing with people just because it helps me understand my own positions better. And I guess I always hold out a glimmer of hope that anyone is redeemable.
Belligerent.
Um, thanks, Platt. I am almost never belligerent when I argue with people. This is not belligerent. This is emphatic. This is not belligerent. Get it straight.
Pre-belligerent.
Anyway, so there's that. So for myself, I'm like, oh yeah, I never thought of it that way. So I like looking for new leftist arguments to try out as I do my Sisyphean task of talking to people on Facebook that I don't know.
And helping me fight my Facebook battles.
Yeah. So there's that. I don't really expect anything to ever really come of that. So I'm not under that illusion at all. But other than that, entertainment's important. And I think far and away the value of debate bros and debate culture is just entertainment. It's a kind of blood sport where you can root for your team and watch the other side get owned or whatever. And it's cathartic because we really don't have a lot of political power on the left. I'm talking the true left, of course, not just liberals, not just anyone who would still keep capitalism around, but actual leftists. We don't hold a lot of political power, so it's nice to see that in at least one realm we can totally dominate and make people look stupid. And it feels good when the people that say the most insane, vicious, X-phobic thing that you can think of look dumb. It feels good to see that happen. But to put it up on a pedestal as though that's going to, change the world and draw enough people over to our side that we're going to just flip everything. I don't think so. That's why I chose theory over debate. I think theory has a lot more promise to actually help people work through ideas in a less confrontational way that because when you're debating, you're not in your normal state of being. You're focused on making your opponent look stupid or weak or whatever, more so than just even making a good argument. And the same is true of them. So there's a lot of talking past one another. There's a lot of one-upsmanship and a lot of stuff that's got nothing to do with actual debate that takes place.
Red herrings and personal
Red herrings,
attacks.
well, definitely personal attacks for sure.
It's like, well, you smell. It's like, cool.
And sometimes they're fun. I'll indulge in it when Brenton Langle was needling Stefan Molyneux about how he's so obsessed with eggs, and it was really getting under his skin. That felt good. That was fun. I liked that, and I had a good laugh about it. But by and large, yeah, it's just fun, really. I guess that's all I'm saying. So that's kind of how I feel about
Nobody
that.
better come for my chicken.
So I choose theory. I think theory is the way it takes work. You got to kind of slow walk through it. It's definitely better to do with other people, which hey, that's why I'm here, to go through it with y'all. But I think that's if anything's going to really convince people, it's that, because I know that for myself, communism was just one of those things, and anarchism as well, was just those sorts of ideas that were just put outside the realm of possibility, just all throughout growing up, whether it was explicit or implicit, whether it was them saying, "Oh, look, 1984, that's only about how communism is necessarily totalitarian and a bad system," and anarchism just means no rules and it's really childish and stuff like that. So you would hear teachers, repeat these sorts of things, and it was just kind of like accepted that this is outside the realm of possibility. But then, really in just the last few years, I started hearing, I just came across good arguments, good ways of thinking more than even arguments, but just like people advocating for their worldview. And it kind of took away the taboo. And I think more than anything, what theory can do is kind of just take away that taboo that this is stuff you can't really entertain as possible, or even, probable in the right circumstances. Something that'll never work, blah, 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 blah. And what theory does is just like, well, no, here's these people's thoughts. Anarchism is not as scary as it seems. It's not no rules. Yes, that is childish. It's no one has the ability to dominate another. That's the basic goal of anarchism. Everyone's on basically a level playing field. Everyone has the same ability to reach their highest and best potential. And whether there are any formalized rules, it's best to have them at the local level and have those take precedent over, higher orders of government taking place. Stuff like that. And same with communism. Communism is not just some man making a iron-fisted speech about how we will crush you, or anything like that. There's actual theory behind it. There's thoughts about, well, where does value come from? Could a business actually survive if it didn't have workers? If it was just the owners, throwing money at a machine, saying, "Get to moving, you make me money." And no, of course not. So I think it just kind of demystified things for me, and then I just got interested in it, and I started learning more and more and more, and read a few books, and here I am today, anarcho-communist, or a libertarian municipalist, if you want to get real technical about it. So Blatt says people willing to use other folks' plight as a ball on their field to compete with are indeed more drawn to strong men leaders. Yeah. And like that, I'm not so concerned about winning over the people that are just wooed by strong men and power and confidence and stuff like that. Because, it seems kind of temporary to me and ephemeral. I'd rather have a longer term system put in place, even if it takes longer to build, and more thought and more discussion. Right-wing reactionary ideas, very simple, easy to communicate, because they're leaning heavily on just the inertia of history and propaganda that has been drilled into all of our brains. You don't have to say capitalism is the best system because this, that, and the other thing, and here's why these other systems fail. You can just say, Quit being lazy. You're only jealous. That's why you're a communist. And look, it's always failed in every country that it's started. You don't have to be very, nuanced or subtle about it. You just point at thing bad, and that's enough to convince people that, hey, well, I guess we should just, this is the best thing we got going. Let's just stick with that. People that actually want real change always have an uphill battle in just explaining why they want what they want and what exactly they want to have happen. And that is not this big scary monster that people believe it. Thing do be bad though, for real. I see solid logic. How can you argue with that? Anyway, I was gonna raid somebody. I think I'm going to choose Chapo Trap House. Oh, let's see. I think they're still going on. It's Oh, wait, what is this deal? Oh, are they not streaming right now? What is going on? Why is it showing that? This is strange. Hold on. I was going to do Chapo Trap House. There we go. For some reason, another thing came up. Anyway, check out Chapo. If you're finding this in another time or space, check them out. They do a wide variety of stuff. There's a lot of people involved in that. I don't actually even know all the names. I just know kind of the principal players. Your Matt Christmans. Yeah, it used to be your Virgil Texas, though. Not anymore. Those sorts of folks. But there's a bunch of people that are involved in that. And yeah, they're kind of cheerful nihilists. They like to bring a lot of humor into their idea that capitalism is pretty hard to oppose. I'll just put it that way. Squid for fun. Left bank. Squid on right now? I did not even see. Sorry, I'm getting the look from my wife, so we're going to do Chapo. I appreciate the suggestion. But I'm getting the death stare, so I don't have time to look up anyone else. I'm so sorry.
Don't start now.
If you want to link their channel yourself, go right ahead. You can put it in chat before we start the raid. But here goes the raid.
Why do you think this is funny?
Here we go. All right, Chapo Trap House. They do a lot of cool stuff. They talk about theory. They throw in humor. They do cultural. Why? What do you mean no results found? Come on. Jesus. Why do they have to? Oh, so okay. Chapo stopped streaming. Right? Or did they? Nope. Yep. They're over. God damn it. I gotta find someone else to raid. I'm so sorry.
How sorry are you?
We'll just go Epic Prawn. Here we go. My good buddy Epic Prawn. Good suggestion. He's someone that I can see is actually streaming right now. So, here we go. Epic Prawn. Good night, everybody. Thank you all for joining. See you all this Friday if we get enough support for doing the leftist karaoke night. So if you want to sing, you want to support us, look for that on Facebook. Here goes the raid.